right, thanks for the intro. I'm Kody Sale. Yeah, I probably don't look as good as Vitalik on stage yesterday, but I'll try to keep you guys entertained. Currently leading product marketing at Obel. Prior to that, built a little protocol on Ethereum called Smoothly, which was an MEV smoothing pool for solo stakers. And before that was just a community member who was passionate about home staking. So I guess I'm one of those guys who just like started from the bottom, now I'm here. Oh yeah, and today we'll be talking about correlated failures and Ethereum. So from a high level, what are the dependencies among a bunch of node operators that could either bring the network down or things like that. There are three types we'll be looking into. So yeah, if you look at this heat map, it kind of shows you the geographic distribution of nodes on Ethereum today. Specifically, like the East Coast and the US and Western Europe are definitely hotspots. And so we'll be looking at cloud failures, stake centralization, and client bugs as three different types of correlated failures today. So for cloud failures, this is the distribution of consensus layer nodes on the network today. Unsurprisingly, hosting nodes dominate with roughly 61%. Shout out to Ethernodes for always having amazing data that we can pull from. But yeah, this isn't really surprising because a lot of the professional node operators are running in cloud, and they run redundant systems so that they also run DVT, so you can fall back in case something happens. But I was kind of surprised that residential is still roughly 35% of the network. So even though solo stakers only account for maybe between 3 and 5% of the stake today, we account for a lot more of the nodes on the network. And that's just a testament to the impact running a node at home can really make. And so if we break down the hosting nodes, Amazon's pretty dominant with roughly 30%. And they don't have a third of the network, so that's pretty solid. But that's closely followed by I'd say two of the top cloud providers and bare metal providers that solo stakers use, which would be Hetzner and OVH. Like I run my node at home, but I also have an OVH node on bare metal just as a redundancy feature. All right, so yeah, while I was actually preparing for this talk, we got to test in prod what happens when one of the biggest regions of AWS goes down. So on October 20th, 2025, AWS, I think it was US East 1, went down. It was like maybe a 14-hour outage. And yeah, crypto Twitter turned into a bit of chaos. From a retail user perspective, it looked like the chain was down, you couldn't access anything. That cat's supposed to be going like this, trying to get a transaction in the network. So yeah, from an optics perspective, it looked really bad. But most people in here know that actually it went really well for the network itself. I'd say, based on those two charts before, roughly 18%. Hello? Roughly 18%. You guys still hear me? All right. Roughly 18% of Ethereum runs on AWS, but consensus participation only went down by roughly between 1 and 2%. And so yeah, that was pretty amazing. I was actually, before this outage happened, I was thinking that would have went down by a lot more, and that missed blocks would have been a lot more as well. But it kind of speaks to just the maturity of the staking ecosystem and how incentives are actually working. And that a lot of the node operators are running redundant infrastructure like Vouch, DVT, and other backup systems. But yeah, other things went less well. So that a lot of decentralized applications maybe they're Dino, they're like decentralized in name only. And so a lot of the dApps front ends went offline, and so you couldn't access any of your favorite decentralized applications to get your transaction in. And even if you could access the application, if you're using MetaMask with the default settings, then you're using Infura, and Infura's mainnet RPC went down. And yeah, we kind of got wrecked. Coinbase went down, Robinhood had an outage, and a variety of other RPCs just went offline for an extended period of time. So it was one of those moments where we've had them over and over again. When there's like a cloud outage, you can't access the network, and we always say we're going to do better, and then we never do. So yeah, it's a kind of a repeat of history. But the good part is, we all know Ethereum just kept chugging along, and yeah, didn't even skip a beat. All right, next we'll look at stake centralization. This was originally called stake centralization, not decentralization, because we've actually improved so much from a couple years ago. So if you remember, 2022 and 2023, Lido was getting, close to 33% of the network, and the community, we kind of turned to the social layer to call on the ecosystem to keep the network decentralized. Famously, Danny Ryan jumped on a Bankless podcast and was like really aggressive about the community decentralizing stake. And it's still up for debate, whether or not Lido deserved that hate. They run multiple operators, but I think the network's better for it. So now today, Lido's at 23.7%, but not only did they reduce the share of the network, they implemented new modules like the simple DBT module, which moved them from 36 node operators at the time to I think over 250 after simple DBT. And also now they have the permissionless CSM module. So yeah, Lido's moving in the right direction, absolutely, and onboarding a ton of node operators. And yeah, it's great for solo stakers because like in CSM, you can earn a lot more rewards than staking solo. And Lido wasn't the only one. So because of like this social layer push, EtherFi also had a EtherFi solo staker program, and brought on over 200 node operators in that program as well. Yeah, we could probably all use a green chart today. It's been a rough couple weeks. So this is the state of the network today as far as stake goes. From a Nakamoto coefficient perspective, it now takes 3 entities, assuming Lido is a single entity, to hold hostage finality. And before it was really, Lido plus 1 small entity. So we're definitely improving stake decentralization. Yeah, it's more decentralized than ever. So although this talk, sounds kind of bearish, like correlated failures in Ethereum, I think as a community and as a whole, we've improved a lot over the last couple years. And what that tells me is the social layer really the push had lasting effects, and just speaks to the testament of the impact the social layer can actually make. All right, so the third type of correlated failure would be like a client bug. And now people are, correlating client bugs with this supermajority risk. So this is an old chart. You can tell because it looks like a chart from Excel in 2012, even though it's pretty recent. In January 2022, Geth, had over 80% of the network, and Prism, was almost at 2/3 of the network at 60%. And this was another time when the social layer actually kicked into gear and was like, we can't, this was before the merge, but after the Beacon chain launched. And I think the goal was really to get Prism and Geth below that, at least 50% before the merge happened. And really, that's what we did, right? There was a big push for client diversity, adopt minority clients to preserve, or to help out the network. And it was really impressive. And so today, we're looking a lot better. Although, Prism's down now to 22% and Lighthouse jumped up to almost 50%. So I think it's always a work in progress, right? We can always improve client diversity. We should all be moving, to some Lodestar, the Nimbus, the Aragons, the Besus, the Reths. But, I'm confident that as a community, we can definitely make that happen. And just like the previous issue, the cloud outage, we also got to test this in prod. So during the Holsky hard fork, or the Pectra hard fork on Holsky testnet, we actually did see the supermajority bug happen. and the network justified an invalid block. And yeah, it was pretty chaotic. We'd been speculating for a long time what would happen in this case. And yeah, it's basically like doomsday, worst case scenario. Eventually the network got to finalize, but yeah, a lot of the validators were slashed, and because of that, the exit queue extended to, over, I think it was 18 months. So if that happened on mainnet, yeah, I'd say just we're just going to zero. But yeah, it would be ugly. And so what are ways we can actually defend against this? So first, I'm sure a lot of people in here, if you're at the EthStaker event, are running a node at home. And so if you're running a node at home, and when the cloud goes down, you can definitely use your own node as your local RPC. That's probably the easiest way to get your transaction in. But if your dApp front end's down, then maybe you need to pull up like Forge or something and use a CLI tool to get it in. But still, you can definitely get your transaction in through your local RPC. Next is run a halting mechanism. So after the issue on Holsky, at Obel, we started thinking about, since we're using a multi-operator architecture, we could actually compare, the head of the chain among the nodes in that cluster. And if the nodes didn't agree on what the head of the chain was, or if it forked off, then that cluster could actually stop attesting, and you would have to manually intervene. So we tested this on Fulu, and it worked really well. So that is one way to protect yourself from this like doomsday scenario. And I know other teams are also working on things like that as well. The next would be stake with multiple operators. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Find operators that run multiple clients. And the last would be choose a minority client. So instead of the Geths and the Netherminds and the Lighthouses, pick a, all these clients are really mature at this point in time, minus the maybe newer, the few newer clients. But yeah, run a minority client, don't be part of the problem. And speaking of like the minority client, if you're running DBT at Obel, we've always pushed for this like end-game cluster architecture, which is multiple operators in various regions around the world, also running different client implementations, and then implementing this stake or this chain halt feature, so that you're diverse around the world. You're running various clients with different operators, but there was always like this single point of failure in such that Charon is a middleware, so it sits between your consensus layer and your validator client, but there was only one implementation. And you have to start somewhere, so that's what we did. But recently we released the DB spec and invited the client teams and other builders in the ecosystem to start writing a second client and a third client using the DB spec, so that Charon is not the only single point of failure in a DB cluster. And over the weekend, we announced at Staking Summit that Nethermind is the first team that's going to be building this. They're a longtime partner of ours, did research in multi-party computation a long time ago, and are definitely, they've been helping us with security audits along the way. So yeah, happy to get Nethermind on board, and yeah, looking forward to like the true endgame cluster architecture, which is a multi-client at the middleware layer as well. All right, well that's it from me. I'm Kody on Farcaster. If you want to hit me up on Telegram, Kody Sale. And I think we have time for questions, probably.
Questions from the audience? Yeah. Actually, I had one question myself here, which is, out of the scenarios that you proposed, are there any that you see as most likely in terms of probability?
I thought that the client bug issue was going to be near zero. And I'd say that it probably is still near zero, but that jumped up much higher than I expected, But cloud failure still seems like the most possible outage to me, because it's happened over and over. You know, there's a precedent that like clouds will go down, but luckily, like the network itself just keeps going, and you know, from a retail perspective, users think that they can't use the network, so they feel like it's down, but you know, most of us know that it's chugging along.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience here? All right, well, Kody, thank you very much for the presentation here.
Yep.